Just stand for a moment and check before you start to move. Check your stance, and the stance we use for a lot of the exercises, the parallel stance, and weight is 50% in each leg, and of that 50%, 70% in the front half of your feet. It's like angling forward. I'm exaggerating, and that angle is corrected by just allowing your hips to drop back. So bringing your weight forwards actually helps to encourage this slight sense of just dropping here. So your center of gravity begins to drop, and then loosen your hips so you can begin to turn a little bit in hips and waist. Starting off nice and gently. A couple of slow, deep breaths. Sign off on the door. That the rhythm and, to a degree, the pace and range of the movement just build in its own time. And as your circulation starts to build and muscles ease out, you'll find that that's quite a natural process. So that the weight of your body is supported by your legs and your feet and the ground beneath your feet. And that the front of your body, belly, solar plexus, chest and ribs, supported by your back. To try and avoid the very common habits of pulling your belly in, tightening your chest, that kind of thing. And it can feel slightly odd. The term sometimes used to describe it, not entirely accurate. It's more describing the feeling of the movement is that your chest has a concave feel. But that's very much a kind of correctional thing. It can feel like that, and it can feel as though you're hunched over. But you gradually get used to this being the upright position, and to the idea that you don't have to strain, stiffen up, particularly in the front of your body, just to remain upright and in position. So always worthwhile making these reflections at the start of a session, because not only do they obviously help the movement, good posture, good movement are very bound up with each other, as well as things like breathing and so on, but also because it's a way of bringing your attention into your body. It becomes a very familiar way. And so this sense of just focusing, gathering your attention away from everything else, all these little details in our lives, things we have to do, and the planning and things we've done, reminiscing and so on and so forth. Nothing wrong with any of those. But what we're trying to do is just to find that other space. So sometimes those details in life can get a bit oppressive, can't they? So, and one of the images I quite like for that process is that it's like you're walking down a pathway through a wood, and the trees are all around you and they're growing up, and you can't see very far, and then suddenly you come to a clearing, and you've still got the wood. It's not a rejection of the wood. You can still see the trees, but you go into the middle of the clearing, and it's a bit more spacious, and in some cases, in some senses, you can see more of the wood and the trees. They say about you can't see the wood for the tree is the saying, isn't it? It's similar to that. So just a sense of resting back, if you like. And that's probably an interesting analogy in the sense that we do it both physically and mentally. This dropping of the hips is a sitting process, a resting back. So all of these things in Tai Chi are very much body-mind processes. And so that's quite a useful thing, I think, to take away from Tai Chi with us into our daily lives. This sense of being able to sit back from a situation My first teacher, Bronwyn Hipkin, used to say frequently that we'd find ourselves standing like this in the supermarket queue. I remember thinking to start off with, why would I do that? Because my legs are aching and so on and so forth. But I very much got what she meant eventually, that this body-mind process, and it might be associated with the physical act, and often is, it just becomes quite intuitive. But more to the point is just that, yeah, I don't need the agitation, or it could do with a bit more space or something like that. And then raising your arms. So the posture gives you less tightness, more space within your body, and the effort that we make to produce the posture and to maintain the posture allows us to get a little bit of space in our thoughts. So carrying on with that idea, with this little movement, just rocking our weight forwards and backwards in our feet. So the stance that we use, the weight would stay forward, but we shouldn't feel that we're stuck there. And there'll be some variation. So I move my weight forwards, the majority of my weight in the balls of my feet. If I go forwards anymore, this is starting to happen. And my body will respond in some ways. I might take a step, but I might also tense up, stiffen up, pull my shoulders back, and I don't want to do that. So going forwards, the range of movement is defined by that. So I go forwards to the balls of my feet, and then when I go back, same thing. I get about the front half of the heel. If I go back any further, I start to stumble around. Those are approximate, and there's always going to be some variation, and it might change through the session. It probably will change through the session. So don't get stuck in a particular place. One theory which I like is that the focal point for your weight is actually just behind the ball of each foot, on the center line of the foot. There's an acupuncture point there called the bubbling well. And interestingly, it doesn't actually touch the ground. So this is a kind of idea for bringing your weight forwards. And that's a useful place to sort of aim for. But in the first instance, just see if you can find somewhere in your foot, somewhere between those 2 points, where your body feels in equilibrium. I try and avoid the term balance, where there is a sense that gravity pulls you down into your feet. In theory, I could take this pen and balance it on the fingertip or on the palm of my hand. In practice, that would be quite hard. So it's a simple enough idea, but it's quite difficult to achieve. And as I said, we're very much in territory where it's not necessarily a fixed point the whole time. And so we begin to feel what it's like rather than rely purely on a technical point. It's quite nice because if you pay attention to the sole of your foot, you'll feel the movement through the big muscles in the arch of your foot, almost like they're being very gently massaged. So again, exaggerating. This time, as you bring your weight forward, you settle in the front half of your feet somehow or another. And then instead of your whole body going back in the way that we've been doing so far, once again, your hips go back and then maybe down a little bit more and pushing up. Sinking down. As you know, the hips go back and your pelvis will tuck under. So try again not to stiffen up, to tighten up in your belly or your lower back. So the expanding and contracting. Bring your hands around as though you're cradling the ball. Push up and let your arms follow your shoulders up. Your elbows going out slightly. Turning your hands, hips drop, shoulders drop, and your hands are drawn down as though you're pushing the ball down into the ball. The rooting down. Main focus of this to begin with should be around the area of your lower back, hips, and buttocks. Just a feeling of releasing, of allowing yourself to drop until you get to a point where there's enough resistance in the legs to push you back up. Don't force yourself down. And you'll feel that in the muscles of your quadriceps, the front of the thigh, the calf muscles, and to an extent in your hamstrings, the muscles on the side of your thighs. Soften the knees. Once again, a nice steady rhythm building. Let your breathing come naturally, unless you're somebody who can easily and comfortably integrate a breathing pattern, in which case the best way of doing it is to take the in-breath as your body expands. And what you may find is you can keep to that for a few rounds, and after that it starts to become a bit more difficult. And if you reach that point, then don't force the breathing pattern. If your body's trying to breathe slightly differently, then let it. But other than that, in-breath as you expand, out-breath as you contract. Don't feel that somehow you're failing if it doesn't work for you with the breathing. That will come in time. And then turn your hands out. The wild goose, with this image of the bird in flight. There are many different ways into these movements. Through the imagery, through the flow, through awareness of posture, breathing, other things as well, or any combination of those. And in the first instance, what we want to do is to just find a way in. All those other elements are there to explore in the course of time. And then still the same in hips, sinking down, let your hands cross in front of you and push up. Try and focus a little bit on this overall dynamic of allowing the hips to drop, feeling the pull of gravity, particularly, as I said before, lower back, hips, buttocks, and then push up. Those two movements are there the whole of your life, really. Gravity is always pulling you down. And unless you've just collapsed in a puddle on the floor, there's always some kind of opposite movement that continues to hold you up. And so long as we're not resisting, tightening against gravity, or indeed the upward movement, that means that there's this constant cycle of movement, a flow of energy within your body. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky, feel an expansion on one side. So that those two movements, the downward movement, the upward movement, the downward movement is almost like water draining away down a plug hole, or the waves withdrawing from the beach, the tide withdrawing from the beach, that kind of thing. The upward movement is likened to the feeling you get if you push a block of wood down into water. And if you were to do that, or a ball, then you would feel the upward movement immediately. It would be there as soon as possible. So although I'm describing this as one and then the other, that's our choice to focus on the downward movement and then on the upward movement. In sort of real terms, those two movements are always there for us to make that choice. One more on each side. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And then settle back in this position. Just be aware again, even if you can't directly feel it, that something is pulling you down and something is preventing you from collapsing. You've got that cycle of movement, whether or not you're actively dropping in your hips. Bring your hands to your sides and then, as it were, just sort of using the upward movement to push your arms up and the downward movement to draw them down. Come back down beside your hips. Pushing up again, pressing out and turning in the center of your body. And back. Turning the other way. And back. And then facing the front and pushing out. Pushing in 4 directions. We sometimes use an image like being in water, moving through water. And if that's a useful image too, or sometimes we talk about the air around as being thicker than normal. And that offers a kind of soft resistance. And this has an impact on our quality of movement. It helps to both create a stronger movement because there is that resistance, but not a strength that requires a stiffening up. You know, if you're in water and you're stiff, it's a much harder work. There's a kind of softer quality, certainly in the outer regions of your body if you're moving in water. Stronger because when we meet that resistance, we quite naturally move in a slightly different way, usually a more connected way. So this isn't just the arms pushing out, this is your whole body expanding. So that will include your back, your belly, solar plexus, and so on. When one part of your body is in motion, your whole body is in motion. Your whole body is engaged in the movement. One more round. And then changing once again just on one side of your body with the expansion, your arm being pushed out, drawing your fingers back slightly so the palm of your hand faces outward and upward, and then down the center arm of your body. Let your arm drop to its full length and just continue the circle. And then if it's comfortable for you, bear in mind this can be quite a strong movement you get to here. And again, you turn in the center of your body. So by center, I'm referring to that area between hips and waist, sometimes referred to as the lower dantian. Dantian would mean the field of energy, sea of energy. So as you get more familiar with these movements, this is where we talk about storing the energy, expands out from there and returns to there. Now change in size. Notice any difference between one side and another. And then add in the turn. So this is a horizontal rotation in the area, hips and dantian. The next two movements, we'll begin to use a vertical rotation. Go back now, just let your arms rest for a moment, sinking down and pushing up. Let's come up a little bit, and then as you sink down, rotate it again in the center of your body, pushing your hips back. And then from here, again, the movement reversed, so your hips drop down and then push up. And notice how that affects the angle of your upper body, sending your head and shoulders forwards. This is going to be rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Push up and your arms follow. Guided by the movement in the center of your body, letting your weight drop down. Just go nice and easy with this one. It can be strong in your knees, strong in your back. When you come up, try and avoid tightening in your neck or your shoulders or your back. Let the pull of gravity on your hip provide the strength, the energy to bring your head up. So we end up being in an upright position without the same sense of stiffening and straining that we often feel accompanies being upright. It takes a bit of getting used to. But again, that contributes to that space within your body and the potential for movement and the flow of energy within your body. And then as you come up this time, hands down in front of your hips, turn, push your hips back, and then turn horizontally, and once again, letting your hips drop down. It's just polishing the table. The combination of a vertical and horizontal circling in that center part of the body is the key thing here. One more in each direction. And then just come back to standing. So when we've got a posture that allows our center of gravity to drop, clearly we're more stable, less strain on the upper part of the body. We're more able to move in the center part of the body. And as we do that, our arms are released. There's less need for being very busy, very active in shoulders, arms, and hands. And they just naturally begin to flow forward. So we've got the space within the body for movement, for the flow of energy, for the flow of the blood, oxygen, and so on and so forth. So the posture is central to that. Posture is essential to that. It's not that without perfect posture you can't do these movements. I'm not sure there is such a thing as perfect posture because we change constantly. But what we're doing is always trying to move towards that. Once again, engaging our attention in the whole movement. And what we should be thinking in terms of here is that there are these three elements, the three treasures of Tai Chi, which is the body, obviously. It's a very much a physical art of our mind, our awareness of what we're doing and how we're moving and so on and so forth. And the movement itself, the energy, the flow. And these three things are the three elements of the Qi, so far as I'm concerned, in Tai Chi Chuan. Qi, I mean, what has a range of meanings, but in this sense, it's better to think of this trinity, body, mind, energy. And imagine it's been like a tripod, or you get three sticks, lean them up against each other, and each stick is supported by and supports the other one. So it's not that one is necessarily more important than the other. We may choose to put our attention into one element or another according to circumstances. But in the first instance, I think it's always appropriate to spend some time bringing your attention into your body, because that brings two of those elements at least together, which is the body and mind, and that provides the support for the third element, the energy. And the flow of the energy is actually quite natural. With good posture working for you, then at least some of the blocks to the flow of energy will be taken away. And you think of water running downhill, and if it's getting blocked up, if you can just remove the obstruction, then it will start to flow again. So it goes further than that in terms of using mind, body, and energy together. But a really important part of this that underlies everything that we do is to have the environment within the body where these things can happen quite smoothly. Now, have your feet parallel again, your weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back, and begin to move your weight a little bit from side to side. This is quite a small bit. I'm going to come closer so you can see my feet will disappear, but don't worry about that. It's just a little bit across and a little bit across. I'm going to 60% of my weight in each leg. If I go any further, then I'm starting to sort of overbalance. So your ultimate aim is to line yourself up over the leg that you're moving towards. So move across into your left leg, and then as you start to arrive with your 60% there, push the right knee forwards, and that does this, that pushes your right heel up, and that release in your right foot allows a little bit more movement to go across. Same thing as you go across to the other side. So gradually more of your weight goes into each leg. You want to get to a point where your head is above the leg. If you look down there, my nose, the middle of my chest, and the center line of the chest, down towards my foot. and then you add into that a turn. You go across into your left and you turn. Just let the right foot swivel. Place the foot down. The feet can be slightly turned out. You push from the supporting leg. Turn. So as you go across, allow your hip to drop. Imagine doing this on a bouncy castle or a trampoline. The very act of sinking down is going to create an upward movement. And what we want to do in the first instance is not let that movement push us up, but rather direct it through the center part of the body across. Have your hand in front of your hips, palm up, feel them moving with you. And then as you go across into your left, your hand, think about your right hand being moved across and slightly pushed up to shoulder height. So here, you're looking across your fingers at shoulder height. You're looking into the mid-distance. Turn your hand palm down, lower your heel down, come back, drawing your hand down. And as you cross the center line, then the midpoint between the feet, your other hand takes over. So this is hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. The very act of moving your weight across and sinking down, allowing your weight to sink down, is the priming, the loading of your leg for the next movement. So we want to do this movement as fully and intentionally as possible. And then we feel the push up. So what we end up with is what a dynamic movement. Still the same idea. You're moving through water. So you're moving with your whole body, with the whole body and mind, body, mind and energy, or focused on one point. Ideally with this movement, and it by no means happens for me all of the time, you can see how those three elements come together. We're hitting the ball, so there's an intent for your hand to meet the imaginary ball. We're sinking down, feeling the push up, feeling the alignment of the body, feeling the movement, the flow of the energy through that aligned body. And ideally, everything will arrive at the same point. The intent to hit the ball, the physical positioning of your hand, movement of the weight, and the maximum point of flow in the energy. More often than not, one of them will be out. So don't get frustrated about that. Every now and then, they come together. And going back to this idea of these three treasures being a tripod, you imagine putting a camera on a tripod, then as long as all three legs of the tripod are functioning well, you'll get a nice steady base for the camera. You'll get a clearer picture. If one's out, you kind of lose that a little bit. One more time on each side. Same movement in your weight, your legs and your hips. That's changing your arms, letting your hands drop down and slightly out. And you'll notice as you come through the middle, a little bit lower and they swing up a bit. So there's a part of a circle there. And we're going to build on this, gradually moving a bit more strongly in our weight and our center, feeling the expansion up through the body, pushing our arms up a little bit. Just cow gazes at the moon. Now, in the first instance, you'll see where I'm looking towards the high corner to my right, to your left, and then down, and then the opposite corner. Just feel how that works in your sides and your back. You shouldn't be twisting up your back at all. But this is an exercise which can be made a bit stronger if this suits you. Be careful of your back, and you really don't want to twist your back up. But I'll come forward a little bit to show you better. I get into this leg, and okay, well, this is fine. But I'd like to go a bit further. I don't want to pull my shoulders around. What I do is I sink down more in my hips to create the space for my body to turn into. Like this, I'm straining against my own body. Like this, I've got the space. And if you haven't got the space there, don't force yourself to move into it. We create the space through that alignment of our body and sinking of our center of gravity, of key components of those. So if you decide you want to move a little bit further in cow gazes at the moon, those are the things to be aware of and begin to work with. One more on each side. Good, and back to this one. Shake your legs. I'm going to change the stance. Now, we want to maintain the width of our step. If our feet are too close together, then it all gets a bit kind of precarious. And so when we take a step in Tai Chi, as a general thing, what we're doing is we're taking a shorter step than normal, but a wider one. So we're not going to kind of stride along in the way that we might if we're going down the shops. When we do that, essentially, what's going on is we're swinging forwards and we're overbalancing. We're overbalancing, but it's okay because this leg comes through. So the question of stability is slightly different in those circumstances. If I try and do that slowly, and I put my foot here and I extend out and I go forwards, I'm now, it's almost like I'm walking a tightrope or something like that. So what I want is the wider stance. I still want enough length. If you look here, you'll see that my front heel is in front of my rear toes. You don't want too short a step. You want enough of a step so that now you can begin to transfer your weight from one foot to another again. Back foot is turned out. Just have that at a comfortable angle, but your front foot points straight forwards. When you go forwards, you're getting up to 60% of your weight in the front leg. You won't get a lot more in at this point. When you go back, get up to 70%. So a little bit more, but still not 100% at this stage. And once again, the very act of sinking down gives you the energy to move. Again, like being on a trampoline. So don't rush this. Give yourself a moment to settle into the front leg, a moment to settle properly in to the back leg, And as you get more used to that, and you get more used to the postures, that it may be that you'll just notice hips out or shoulders out or something. You just correct that. And then raising your toes and your heel. Now you can turn the front foot out a little bit. That opens up the hip, push your back knee forwards. And as you do this, like in the previous exercise, as we start to release a part of the foot, a little bit more of the weight can go into the leg. And like with the sideways movement, we're looking to align ourselves over the leg. Try not to lean. I lean back here. If I'm leaning with the shoulders, I'm already being pulled back. If I go forwards, if I'm leaning forwards, I'm being pulled forward. So your body remains upright as you do this. And then raising your toes. Still, but bringing the foot in. So this is a shortish but wide step. I like to think of it sometimes not so much as a step, because when we step, we would lean out, we might pump with our arms and so on and so forth, but more as a sort of contraction of the leg and an expansion of the leg. And shake out. I find it helpful in Tai Chi, and I think there's a lot of areas in Tai Chi where, in a sense, we play with the words. We redefine what we're trying to do, because along with the words goes a set of assumption. When we say walk, most of us will angle forward slightly, and that's quite a reasonable thing to do in many circumstances. It's like if we talk about balance, we tend to think, oh, this is balancing, but in fact, what I'm trying to do when I come to here is to remain stable, and I get stability by aligning myself with the leg and by dropping my center of gravity. I only need to balance when I've lost that stability. So our priority isn't to balance. Our priority is to align and root down and achieve stability. Our priority isn't to sort of pace along or anything like that, but rather to find a way of stepping that enables us to maintain what we call central equilibrium, is a term that sums up all of these things. So now I've got which leg I had forwards. Anyway, have the other foot forwards. Been moving around so much. Same idea, and beginning to transfer your weight. Always check. So in a class or in your own time, don't assume you've got it right. And that can be quite difficult. I've found myself standing in seminars and the teacher said, yeah, this should be happening. And I'm thinking, oh, who's got it wrong? And then it turns out to be me, which is always embarrassing. And sometimes when I'm teaching in-person classes, I can be standing in front of a group of people, none of whom have the correct stance, and I say this, this, and this, and everybody stands there and nobody changes anything. So don't assume that this isn't relevant to you. The worst that can possibly happen is that you check and you find you've got it correct. But the value of that checking is once again bringing your attention back in. So then raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in Now take a few steps through, coming in either forwards or backwards. You extend the leg and you swing out. So the foot will move through a semicircle. And then back the other way. The stepping is a useful thing to practice. The weight change is essential. We are naturally hardwired towards creating movement, leading movement with the upper part of our body, especially our arms and our hands. Just an evolutionary thing for us. But the movements in Tai Chi will all follow the pattern of kind of, legs, feet, position in alignment, transfer of the weight, turning in the center. These are the components that guide our hands for us. And in the end, if we're looking for a sustainable flow, and we all recognize those flowing movements in Tai Chi, but the flow comes because our arms, not because our arms aren't doing anything, but we're not having to strain and force the movement with our arms. So have your right foot forwards, check your stance, and starting with your weight in your back foot, arms by your side, move your weight forwards and then just let your arms swing through and back. Swing through. This is fisherman castanet. And just see if you can get a sense for the movement, the flow of the energy from your foot and your leg as you sink down into it and it starts to push you back through your back and out through your arms. Don't let your arms overextend. And again, notice the slight curve in the trajectory of your fingers. And this time, as you go back, turn. And this time, let your hands curve all the way up, about shoulder height, go forwards and turn, creating this lovely figure of eight movement, sideways figure of eight movement. Notice that my hands stay about the same distance from each other, and roughly speaking, apart from the up and down movement, in about the same position as my shoulders. So what, for instance, I'm not doing is going back, not turning and moving my arms out like that. What I'm doing is I'm turning my body. See, my hands are still in a very comfortable position and the energy will still flow. And shake out. Now, have your left foot forwards. Start with fisherman castanet. Just focus on the sensation of movement and flow within your body. and then turning, arms swinging down and up, soften your shoulders. Don't let your hands go too far from your body. And if your shoulders are stiff, one thing to think about really is how far have my hands extended. If I'm right out there, I'm tight in my shoulders. Actually, they're quite close in. Now turn your front foot out a little bit, and this time, as your hands come up, bringing your foot in. And step and go forwards. Or you could do is going backwards, depends where you've got the space. Just rest here for a moment before you take the step. And when you get to this position, are your hips in line, so on and so forth. And then going back. Change direction. And this time going forwards into the same position. But then if you're comfortable with this, just raise your knee and step. And then check your posture. And if you're stable, raising the knee. It's a fairly straightforward process. And then again, changing direction. And bring your feet down. So when we've got the roots and the alignment, when we've achieved stability, we've removed the need to balance, then we can start to again play around with the limbs, the empty leg, the hands, and so on and so forth. Become like the branches of a tree. A tree doesn't balance on the earth. A tree has roots that it puts down, and the branches aren't necessarily symmetrical in a tree, particularly not a wild tree. You might have a big branch going out in one side, and mostly that's okay. It doesn't just automatically pull the tree over. So you could, for instance, with this exercise, I'll show you from the side. You could add into this. You bring the knee up, and then you push out with the heel as though you're pushing the door open and back, and then you go down. Whereas if I was actually balancing here on my leg, as soon as I did that, I'd get pulled forwards because the point of balance would be changing. So just rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, and your arm. And the other side. Onto your back. Around your hips. And your legs. and belly, and the upper part of the chest. It's the nature of things that these ideas suggest a sort of state, but the state isn't permanent. We come into and out of it. Change is natural. And so the last exercise, Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, you can think of the mountain as an image that encapsulates this idea of being rooted, of being quiet and being still in the mind, and an image of strength. And so in Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, essentially there's an acknowledgement. You're not going to be like that all the time, but once again, you can come back to it on a regular basis. So back to the parallel stance, letting your hips sink down and then pushing up, Embrace Tiger, return to the mountain. And stand. Lovely. Let's shake out. Thank you very much, everybody. So.